The pasuk says, "Ki Adam eitz hasada." The Gemara says, "V'chi Adam eitz sada" is a person, in fact, a tree of the field. Rather, says the Gemara, based on what seems to be a contradiction in two psukim. One pasuk is saying you should eat from the trees and don't cut it down. Another pasuk saying cut down the tree. Says the Gemara, what these psukim are teaching us is that if he's a proper Talmid Chacham with good character traits, you should eat or learn from him. As opposed to, if he's a Talmid Chacham with not such good character traits, then you shouldn't. Says the Rebbe, the Gemara seems to implying that the tree of the field is not just an analogy, something that we could learn from the tree in regards to the person. But rather, the Gemara seems to be saying that the tree is very, very much really expressing what a person is all about. Because if it was just an analogy, then why would the Gemara ask, V'chi Adam eitz hasada, is a person really a tree of the field? Like, why not? In many ways, we could find similarities or things that the tree serves as an example for the person. So it sounds like the Gemara is telling us much more than this, that the person is really the idea of a tree. But if that's the case, then how did the Gemara answer the question by telling us that if he's a proper Talmid Chacham, then you should learn from him? And generally, says the Rebbe, how is it possible to say that the quality of the human being is expressed specifically by calling him Eitz HaSada, by calling him a tree of the field? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by having a closer look at the difference between Tzomeach, the plant life, compared to other things that the Eibishter created. We know there's Doimim, Tzomeach, Chayim, Medaber, the inanimate, the plants, animals, and human beings. Says the Rebbe, in all other things other than the plants, they are not connected to their root, to their source. A person, an animal, is not connected to the ground. And once a child is born, or lahavdil, the animal is born, he's no longer connected to its mother. It's only the plants that are connected to their roots, to their source in the ground. The Rebbe says, even fish that are also within their source of water, says the Rebbe, but number one, fish are always within their source. They can't leave the source, where the idea of the plant life is that although it's growing out of the source like a tall tree, and nevertheless it's still connected to the source. Number two, says the Rebbe, the fish are not necessarily connected to a particular body of water that's their source. They can move from one body of water to the other, whereas the plant is staying connected, rooted to its own source. Says the Rebbe, and within this itself there's a particular advantage, specifically in trees, that not only are they connected to their source for a short amount of time, like some of the other plants, but a tree remains there from one year to the next throughout all the seasons, and producing fruits year after year, which shows on such a powerful connection to its source that despite all of the changes, it still remains and it's producing fruit, etc. Says the Rebbe, we know that a person is considered an olam katan, a miniature world. So a person also has all the things of the greater world, the doimim, tzomeach, chayim, medaber, exist in a miniature way within the person. The Rebbe is going to explain that seichel is more like the chay inside the person. The intellect is more like the animal inside the person in a certain way. And tzomeach is going to be more the midos, the emotions. So the emotions are called tzomeach, they grow. It's like emotions that are growing from a small emotion to a big emotion, the person getting more and more emotional. In seichel, says the Rebbe, in intellect, although there's also that idea of growing from small to big in intellect, but it's also similar to the animal in the sense that it moves from one place to the other. It's not firmly attached, firmly connected to one particular place. Seichel is not defined and not limited by the nature of the person. He doesn't always have to be in one mode. He can be switching from chesed to gevura. He can understand things in one way. He can understand things in a different way. The whole idea of seichel is about looking at things in an objective way, not the way I feel like understanding it, and really trying to understand it for what it is. Midas, on the other hand, are much more defined by who the person is. There's one person that's more of a chesed person, and it's going to be very, very difficult for him to change and suddenly become a different person. A person of gevura, and the same thing, the opposite. What he does have is the idea of tzomeach, he grows. Says the Rebbe, just like we said that the advantage of tzomeach is that it's very much connected to the source. In midos, there's also this idea, the fact that it doesn't change, and is because it's so deeply connected to its root in the pnimiyus hanefesh, in the soul of the person. And that's exactly why we find that midos can be very, very strong, very powerful, very passionate. and usually difficult to change from one midah to the other because it's so deeply connected to the nefesh. And therefore you won't find so much that the chesed person is changing to gvura as mentioned before. Although, of course, it's shaykh, it's possible for a midah to change, definitely changing from a bad midah to a good midah, just like by a tree, that with extra effort, you could uproot a tree and replant it somewhere else. Says the Rebbe, because midas are so deeply connected to the person, connected to the root, that's what we mean when the pasuk says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada, that it's specifically in the midos, in the tzeimeach, in the plant life, or in the tree inside of him, that's really what expresses who the person is on the deepest level. And that's why in the avodah of a person, the main avodah is also going to be in how he deals with his midas, how he refines his midas, how he elevates his midas. That's a much more important avodah than just with his seichel. And it's only through the midas that a person comes really to his perfection, when he really becomes the person who he's supposed to be. In fact, even the seichel, even the intellect comes to its perfection only if it's going to impact the midos, going to impact the way the person behaves and the way he acts and so on. Says the Rebbe, that's what the Gemara means when it says that the pasuk, when it says Adam Eitz Hasada, is telling us that if he's a proper Talmid Chacham with good character traits, then that's who you should learn from. What's the idea of a Talmid Chacham Hagun? In other words, we're speaking about not that he has the quality of seichel. Seichel is a great thing, but that's not the ultimate. The ultimate is when the seichel that the Talmid Chacham is learning impacts who he is, changes, is impacting his midos. It's affecting him to act in a proper way with good character traits. Says the Gemara, from such a person, that's really who you should learn from. Says the Rebbe, just like it's by every individual that the midos are so important, and that's really what's expressing the deepest connection with his nefesh. The same thing is true in regards to Klal Yisrael. We know that Klal Yisrael, we are rooted in the three avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And again, the connection of the Yidden and the avos is going to be primarily in the midos. We know that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, these are the midos. They correspond to the midos of Avraham being chesed and ava, love, Yitzchak being the idea of fear and awe, Yaakov being the idea of racham and compassion and mercy, and these are the midos that they had left over to us as a Yerusha to all of their children. This is why we call them the Avos, because every Yid always has these midos of the Avos. Why is that? Because a Yerusha, an inheritance, is the idea that the very essence of the person giving the inheritance or leaving the inheritance is connected in the deepest way with the person that's going to get the Yerusha. And this is why what's being given over as a Yerusha? Specifically the midos, specifically these ideas of the midos which are connected with the etzem HaNefesh of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is being given over to their children, to each and every one of us. And the Rebbe concludes with a Hoirah. On the one hand, we know the source of life of every single Yid is this Torah and mitzvahs, ki heim chayenu, that's our life. Practically speaking, there are very few people that they're involved their whole life only with Torah, Teirasam, Umnasam. That would be like the fish in the sea that are completely absorbed in their source. Most Yidden, according to Torah, need to go out there in the world and make a place for Hashem inside the world. A Yid needs to remember that he's an Eitz Hasada, that he's a tree in the field. You always need to be connected to your source of Chayes. So the Torah and mitzvahs that you had when you were still within the tents of Torah, the domain of Torah. That means your feeling has to be not that once upon a time I learned Torah, but a Yid has to feel always his connection to the time when he was learning Torah and feeling that that's my chayas, that's my life right now as well. That's on the one hand for those that do go out into the world. On the other hand, those that sit and learn Torah need to know that it's not enough just the learning of Torah itself, because as we said before, in seichel itself, in intellect itself, there could be changes. You can move around from one place to the other. There's no guarantee necessarily what's going to happen once he leaves the tents of Torah. And therefore, as the pasuk says, you need to make sure that which is in your mind and your knowledge and your intellect impacts your midos, impacts your feelings and your behaviors. And it's only then that it becomes engraved in the person in a way that the person doesn't really change, that the seichel impacted the midos, which is this deepest part of the nefesh, that in every single situation, wherever he will be, he will always remain connected to the source of life, which is Torah and mitzvahs.